Stephen and Rachel Harper have been together for 15 years. He is a successful lawyer, 42 years old, used to getting his way and keeping everything under control. She is a striking blonde of 38 years old, a housewife who once dreamed of a career as a designer but chose a family. Their union seemed ideal, although over time, cracks began to appear in it, which they did not notice or simply did not want to admit. They had a 14-year-old daughter, Lily, a smart, independent girl who learned to understand people too early. She loved her father, but saw that his demands on her mother at times crossed the line, and her mother, in turn, did not always seem happy. Lily felt tension in the house, even if her parents pretended that everything was fine. Stephen was the kind of man who was used to managing. He provided for the family, he made decisions, he created a comfortable life for them. In return, he demanded devotion, respect, and absolute fidelity. For him, marriage was not just a union of two people, but something like a contract that did not imply violations. He believed that he was fulfilling his role perfectly. He brought money into the house, took care of the future of the family, and tried to be a good father. So he didn't understand why Rachel often looked depressed and distant. Rachel, on the other hand, has felt caged in recent years. Her life turned into a routine taking care of the house, rare meetings with friends, meaningless evenings in front of the TV, while her husband was busy with his own affairs. She had long felt an emptiness that she could not fill either with new furniture or purchases or rare flashes of attention from Stephen. Her days were similar to one another, and every year it seemed to her that she was losing herself more and more. Once upon a time, they both dreamed of a big house, a happy family, and another child. However, over the years, this idea has faded into the background. They tried to have a second baby, but unsuccessful attempts dampened their enthusiasm. Stephen still hoped that their family would grow, but Rachel began taking birth control pills without telling him. She felt that she was not ready to become a mother again. Her life already seemed not her own. Stephen didn't notice the changes. He continued to think that their family was ideal. Sometimes he even wondered how a woman like Rachel had once paid attention to him, a simple guy from the middle class, without any special ambitions, without a big name. Now he was successful, wealthy, he had a beautiful wife, a smart daughter, a house that could be shown in a glossy magazine. Isn't that what he wanted? Isn't this what he dreamed about? But behind this external calm were hidden feelings and thoughts that they did not talk about to each other. Rachel became more and more immersed in herself. She was burdened by routine, the monotony of marriage, and a lack of emotions. She felt that the fire inside her had long gone out, and she no longer knew how to relight it. Stephen was so absorbed in work and his beliefs that he did not notice the changes in his wife. It seemed to him that everything was going as usual, that some changes were inevitable in a marriage after many years. Stephen often asked Rachel this question jokingly, of course, but deep down he was really curious. How did such a bright, confident woman once pay attention to him, a simple guy without a big name and impressive achievements? He said this with a slight smile, but each time he waited for her answer, as if he wanted to make sure again that their story was not an accident. Rachel always laughed in response and also said jokingly, "If I hadn't met you then, you probably would have died of depression, poor thing. You looked so lost." And indeed, at that time Stephen was depressed. A difficult breakup with his girlfriend left him alone, full of doubts and emptiness. He felt that he had lost not only the relationship, but also a part of himself. Work did not bring pleasure, meetings with friends seemed meaningless, and he sank deeper and deeper into this state. When Rachel came into his life, she became a real ray of light for him. It was easy with her, simple, as if she filled the very gap that his former love had left. They laughed together, and Stephen enjoyed the little teasing. There was something cozy in these words, something reminiscent of the early years of their relationship, when everything seemed simple and natural. When he was not only her husband, but also the very person she chose, no matter what. These conversations always created a warm atmosphere between them. He recalled how in the early years of marriage they could talk about everything, easily tease each other, and feel that their connection was only growing stronger. Perhaps it was precisely in such moments that the real meaning of family life lay in small jokes filled with love and understanding. Stephen grew up in a small town in Ohio, in an ordinary working-class family. His father worked as an auto mechanic, and his mother was a nurse. As a child, he was not particularly talented or charismatic, but he was diligent and dreamed of breaking out of his hometown. He was always told that he had to work hard to achieve success, and he took these words as a guide to action. After school, he entered Ohio State University, choosing law school. In the first years of his studies, Stephen was modest and even a little withdrawn. He spent more time reading books than in noisy companies and rarely participated in student parties. His goal was clear: to get a good education and build a career. He could not afford to be distracted by temporary entertainment. But even despite this, he still had a relationship. At university, he met a girl named Lauren, beautiful, ambitious, and confident. She was his complete opposite: sociable, energetic, loving attention. They began dating, and although their relationship was passionate, it did not last. Lauren wanted more noisy parties, travel, freedom. Stephen was focused on stability. Their paths diverged, and the breakup left a mark on his soul. After university, he moved to Chicago, where he began working for a large law firm. The city was a completely different world compared to his hometown: fast, tough, ambitious. Stephen understood that if he wanted to achieve something, he needed to become the same: confident, persistent, decisive. It was during this period of his life that he met Rachel. She appeared unexpectedly, turning his idea of love and life upside down. Her eyes did not have the hardness to which he was accustomed, but at the same time there was a sense of strength in her. With her, he felt for the first time that life is not only about work and achievements, but also about the moments that make it all meaningful. Stephen had never been a fan of social events, but that evening he was literally dragged there by a colleague. It was a charity evening in one of the prestigious hotels in Chicago. There were quiet conversations everywhere, the clinking of glasses of champagne, and the air was saturated with the light aroma of expensive perfume. People moved around the hall, exchanging polite phrases, discussing the latest news in business and social life. Stephen felt a little out of place, but as always, he behaved confidently and reservedly, trying not to show his discomfort. It was there that he first saw Rachel. She stood at one of the tables, laughing about something with a friend, and attracted attention to herself without any effort. There was something bewitching in her movements, and in her eyes there was a sparkle that captivated you at first sight. Stephen felt something move inside him. He couldn't look away, as if he was afraid of missing something important. By a strange coincidence, they were introduced to each other. He extended his hand to her, and she smiled easily, naturally, as if they had known each other for many years. "Stephen Harper," he introduced himself. "Rachel. Just Rachel," she replied with a sly smile. The conversation began by itself, as if they were continuing an old conversation that had begun in another life. They talked about everything: music, travel, funny incidents from childhood. Time flew by unnoticed, and it was as if other people had disappeared around. He noticed how her eyes sparkled when she talked about her favorite places, and realized that in front of him was not just a beautiful woman, but a person with depth and dreams. "You don't particularly like such events, right?" she suddenly asked, noticing his slightly tense appearance. "I won't say that this is my favorite pastime," he chuckled, "but now I quite like it here." She smiled wider, tilting her head slightly to the side. "Is that so? Maybe it's because of the company." He grinned back, feeling an invisible thread forming between them. Everything was too easy, too natural. At that moment, he realized that in recent years he had rarely felt such genuine pleasure from a conversation. He wasn't used to having someone read him so well, but with Rachel it felt completely natural. They didn't notice how the whole party passed, completely immersed in conversation. When the evening came to an end, he didn't want to leave. They parted well after midnight, but before parting, Stephen took her number. He did not know where their acquaintance would lead, but he felt that it should not have ended that evening. Rachel smiled too, pausing for a moment before walking away. Before going their separate ways, she agreed to meet him the following week, saying that she had enjoyed spending the evening in his company. There was something promising in her gaze. Later, already at home, he lay in bed for a long time, replaying their conversation in his head. He knew one thing: this meeting changed something in him, and perhaps forever. Their first meeting after the party took place in a cozy cafe on the outskirts of Chicago. Stephen arrived a little earlier and chose a table by the window, overlooking the noisy street. He noticed her as soon as she entered, confident, elegant, with a slight smile on her lips. Her long coat flowed over her figure, and sincere joy was visible in her eyes. "I hope I didn't keep you waiting," she said, sitting down opposite him. "Not a bit," he answered with a smile. "I always come earlier anyway." The conversation began as easily as the first time. They discussed work, hobbies, and plans for the future. Rachel talked about how she works as an interior designer, but dreams of one day opening her own studio. Her voice became animated when she talked about her favorite projects, and her eyes shone with excitement. She described how she loves to select colors, find the perfect combination of textures and materials, and how she can sometimes spend hours peering at furniture, choosing the perfect option for her clients. "It seems to me that you are the kind of person who turns any space into a work of art," said Stephen. "You haven't even seen my work," she laughed. "But I see how you talk about her." Stephen, in turn, shared his impressions of the work. Jurisprudence seemed dry and strict, but in his voice one could hear respect for his work, a desire to seek justice and achieve results. He told how even at university he dreamed of becoming a lawyer, how difficult it was in the first years of work, how he sometimes doubted himself, but still continued to move forward. This meeting flowed into the next, then another. They walked through the park, laughed at random passers-by, and shared stories about their childhood. There was more and more trust between them. Their conversations became deeper, more intimate. They were no longer just two people who met by chance at a party. Now it was something more. They often went to museums, tried new cuisine, and discussed books they were interested in. It seemed they could talk for hours and not get tired of each other. Over time, their meetings became more personal. They sat on the sofa in her apartment, watched old films, and discussed important moments in life. One evening, after a long walk, they stopped at her house. There was tension in the air, pleasant and viscous. She looked at him with a slight challenge and then stepped closer. "Would you like to come in for a cup of coffee?" Her voice was soft, but there was a hidden invitation in it. Stephen nodded, knowing full well that coffee would be the last thing on their minds that night. They entered her apartment and turned on the dim lights. He sat down on the sofa. She went into the kitchen, but soon returned with glasses of wine. They talked a little more, but between words there were long pauses filled with something more than just friendly interest. Rachel ran her fingers over his arm, and he looked into her eyes. At that moment, everything became extremely clear. Their relationship had entered a new stage, and both knew it. That night, there were no barriers between them. This was the first time, but far from the last. They spent the entire next day together, not wanting to part. Now their connection was stronger, deeper, and their feelings were stronger. At the time their relationship entered a new stage, Stephen was already quite wealthy. His career at a law firm was booming, and he could afford to live large. He wanted Rachel to see his world, to feel the stability and comfort that he had achieved through years of hard work. He took her to the best restaurants in Chicago, where the waiters knew him by name and the tables were reserved in advance. They tasted rare wines, delicious dishes, discussed tastes, and enjoyed every minute spent together. "I admit I'm not so easily surprised," Rachel said, sipping wine from a crystal glass. "But you deal with it." "Then wait, that's not all," he chuckled. One evening, he asked her to go for a ride with him. They left the restaurant, and he opened the passenger door of his sports car for her, a luxurious dark blue Porsche that was his pride. The engine roared powerfully and confidently as he started it. They rushed through the night city, leaving behind the flickering lights of the streets, and the wind played in her hair. "Are you bragging now?" she asked with a sly smile. "A little," he admitted, "but I like sharing it with you." Later, He showed her his house, a spacious, modern mansion with huge panoramic windows and a stylish interior. There was no pretentiousness in it, but one could feel the taste and status. Rachel looked around, her eyes sweeping over the living room with a fireplace, a leather sofa, a spacious kitchen with marble countertops. "Impressive," she said, crossing her arms. "You really achieved this." "Yes, but none of this means anything if I can't share it with someone special," he replied, looking at her. She looked at him with interest, as if she was seeing him for real for the first time. A slight doubt stirred inside Stephen. He hoped that she loved him not for his money, not for his comfortable life, but for who he really was. At that moment, something more than just passion or attraction arose between them. It was a feeling that their lives were beginning to intertwine, becoming one. Their sex life began with caution. Stephen was experienced, but from the very beginning he noticed that Rachel was much freer and more relaxed in this regard. Her confidence, ease of movement, ability to talk about her desires without embarrassment, all this surprised him and at the same time excited him. She knew what she wanted and was not afraid to take the initiative into her own hands. Stephen took it as a challenge. He never doubted his skills, but with her around, he felt like he had room to grow. He wanted to become for her the man who could give her maximum pleasure, who would make her forget about everything except the sensations that he gives. Their first night together was passionate, intense, but there was more to it than just physical attraction. Looks, touches, complete immersion in each other. It was not just sex, but something deeper. For Stephen, this became something of a test in which he intended to surpass himself. Over time, he began to understand that Rachel was not just more experienced than him. She felt her partner on an intuitive level, could predict desires, but at the same time did not lose her naturalness. He admired her body, her reactions, the way she moved, how she arched under him, how her fingers dug into his back, leaving marks in the morning. Stephen learned from her as much as she learned from him. Their intimacy became deeper and more intense. He wanted to win her not only as a woman, but also as a person who completely trusts him. And he was not going to stop until he became the only man for her who could bring her to ecstasy. Stephen never thought that he would ever meet a woman with whom he wanted to spend the rest of his life. But with Rachel, it was different. He knew that he wanted her by his side forever. Their relationship developed rapidly, and one day he simply realized that it was time to take the next step. He did not doubt his decision, but the excitement was still present. He thought long and hard about how to make this moment truly unforgettable. He thought through the proposal to the smallest detail. Chicago at night, a private room at one of their favorite restaurants, candles, soft lighting, and a gourmet dinner. The table was decorated with white roses, her favorite flowers. When the waiter brought dessert, there was a small box with a ring on the plate. Stephen looked at her and, a little nervously, said, "I never thought that I would meet a woman who would change me the way you did. You are the best thing that happened in my life. Rachel, will you marry me?" She looked at him, her eyes filled with tears, but the smile did not leave her face. At that moment, everything around disappeared, just the two of them. "Yes," she whispered, and then louder. "Yes." They planned the wedding carefully, not wanting to rush. They chose a country house surrounded by green lawns overlooking a picturesque lake. The weather that day was perfect, sunny skies, a light breeze. Everything turned out as if according to the script of a romantic film. The wedding was elegant, but without unnecessary pomp, only close friends and family. Rachel looked stunning in a simple yet elegant white dress that showcased her natural beauty. Stephen couldn't take his eyes off her, amazed at how beautiful she was at that moment. When they exchanged vows, he felt it was the most important moment of his life. He held her hands, his voice was firm and confident. "I promise to love you, support you, be your support at any moment. You are my destiny, and I am grateful for every moment we spend together." Rachel looked at him warmly and whispered, "I never doubted you, Stephen. You are the one I was looking for. You are my home." After the wedding, they honeymooned in Italy. Rome, Florence, Venice. Every day was full of romance and passion. They walked along the narrow streets, enjoyed wine and seafood, and watched sunsets on the shore. They rode gondolas along the canals of Venice, holding hands, oblivious to the world around them. They laughed, drank champagne under the starry sky, and made wishes by throwing coins into the Trevi fountain. Stephen was confident that he had made the right choice. He married the woman he truly loved. In Italy, they forgot about everything, about work, about routine, about the future. There were only them, their love, and a feeling of endless happiness. He did not know that a completely different reality awaited them ahead, where the fairy tale would begin to burst at the seams. But at that moment, when he held her hand and kissed her under the Italian sun, he was absolutely happy. Stephen and Alex have been friends for many years. They met at university and have been through a lot together since then. Alex was the person Stephen could trust unconditionally. They worked together, vacationed together, always supported each other, and Stephen considered him practically a brother. They could talk for hours about life, dreams, work, share their experiences and joys. Their connection seemed unbreakable, as if they were family. When Alex was going through a difficult divorce a few years ago, Stephen was there. He saw how his friend suffered, lost himself, how hard it was for him to come to terms with the breakup. Alex looked devastated, lost, and Stephen did everything to help him, supported him, pulled him out to meetings, forced him not to withdraw into himself. He even arranged a short vacation for him, a week on the ocean shore, so that his friend could come to his senses and forget about his problems for a while. He believed that Alex was a victim of injustice because he himself said that his wife was cold, indifferent, and in the end simply left him. In Stephen's eyes, Alex was a hapless victim who needed help. But over time, the truth came out. One day, in a conversation with a mutual friend, Stephen heard a completely different version of events. It turned out that everything was not as Alex said. His wife left for a reason Alex himself destroyed his marriage by cheating on her with another woman. Moreover, this was not a momentary mistake, not a momentary weakness. He dated this woman for almost a year, hid it until his wife found out the truth. He hid his betrayal for years, making excuses to everyone and presenting himself as a victim of circumstances. When Stephen heard this, he felt a strange feeling, a mixture of disappointment, anger, and betrayal. How could he not notice? How could he believe everything Alex told him? Remembering their conversations, he began to see how he cleverly manipulated the facts, always presenting himself in a favorable light. Alex complained about his wife, saying that she did not appreciate him, that there had been no warmth in their marriage for a long time. And now it became clear why. Stephen did not immediately tell Alex about this. He didn't know what to do. Their friendship meant a lot to him, but now he saw in his friend a different person than he had thought him to be all these years. For the first time in a long time, an invisible wall appeared between them. He wanted to ask a question. He wanted to force his friend to confess, but he could not bring himself to say the words. He tried to justify it, to convince himself that people make mistakes. But doubts had already settled in his soul. Alex acted as if nothing had changed. They still met, discussed work, and went to the bar on Fridays. Alex joked, told stories about his new hobbies, without showing a single drop of remorse. But inside, Stephen felt that he looked at him differently now. He couldn't help but think about how cleverly his friend hid his actions, how skillfully he created the image of an offended husband. And if he could lie about his marriage so easily, what else could he lie about? Despite this, their friendship remained strong. Stephen didn't tell Alex what he learned and continued to treat him like his best friend. They still met, went to the bar, discussed work and life, and Alex acted as if nothing had changed. Internally, Stephen tried to convince himself that the mistakes of the past shouldn't ruin their friendship. After all, people are imperfect, and he knew that Alex was always there in difficult moments. He tried to convince himself that friendship was more important than the mistakes of the past, that none of this mattered, but a dull feeling of disappointment would not let him go. Stephen had long noticed that Alex had some kind of special magnetism. Women themselves clung to him, even if he did not show obvious interest in them. He was charming, knew how to win over his interlocutor, and always found the right words. Unlike Stephen, who was used to restraint and prudence, Alex was always easygoing, able to joke and remain the center of attention. Stephen didn't think much of it until he started noticing that his wife, Rachel, was constantly pushing him to spend more time together. She often repeated that Alex was depressed after the divorce and needed more communication, that he needed the support of friends. "You should invite him to us more often," she said, pouring herself a glass of wine. "Alex is going through a difficult period right now, and he needs company. Don't you want to help your best friend?" Stephen didn't see anything wrong with it at first. He really wanted to help his friend, but over time he began to feel that Rachel was becoming too involved in Alex's problems. One day at dinner, he carefully tried to express his thoughts. "I think you're getting too involved in Alex's problems," he said, putting down his fork. "Yes, he is our friend, but he is an adult. I don't think he needs that kind of constant care." Rachel just smiled and shrugged. "You just don't understand what it means to be alone after a divorce. It's difficult for him now, and he needs us." Stephen sighed, but did not continue the conversation. He didn't want to argue, but there was a strange feeling inside him that all this went beyond the boundaries of ordinary sympathy. Indeed, after the divorce, Alex sometimes looked depressed and said that he felt lonely. He supported his friend, invited him to visit, and at first everything seemed quite natural. They dined together, discussed the news, recalled their student years, drank until the evenings turned into nights, and Alex became an almost permanent guest in their house. But over time, Stephen began to notice something strange. Alex visited them more and more often, even when Stephen himself was not at home. His wife would sometimes mention it in passing, saying that he was just stopping by for a cup of coffee or that they happened to meet nearby, and he decided to stop by. And the more such accidents happened, the stronger the feeling of anxiety grew. Stephen tried to shrug it off, telling himself that Rachel was just looking out for his friend. After all, she was always kind and sympathetic. But deep down, he began to wonder, was this really just friendly support, or was there something more hidden behind it? Years passed, but nothing changed. Alex remained a frequent visitor to their home, appearing sometimes by invitation, sometimes unexpectedly, as if his presence had become something taken for granted. Every time Stephen tried to suggest to his wife that perhaps they should give their friend more space, she would just smile and say, "You know how hard it is for him. Alex is still recovering from the divorce. His emotional state is fragile, and he needs support." But Stephen couldn't help but notice that Alex didn't look broken or depressed at all. On the contrary, he was still as confident, charming, and witty. It seemed as if the depression Rachel was talking about existed only in her words. Alex never seemed like someone who needed reassurance. He laughed, communicated with people easily, and was always the center of attention. Sometimes Stephen caught himself thinking that his friend seemed to be deliberately taking up more space in their lives than he should. He stayed late, not noticing any hints that it was time to leave, and could suddenly appear with a bottle of wine or a box of pizza, as if this united the three of them into one unchanging circle. And if at first Stephen perceived this as part of a long-standing friendship, now it became increasingly difficult for him to ignore the feeling of slight irritation. But Rachel remained unchanged. She continued to defend Alex, saying that he was not as strong as he seemed, that behind his smiles there was pain, that he simply did not want to show his weakness. Stephen began to wonder more and more often, was he the only one who saw that his friend was not at all who he was said to be? And if Alex isn't suffering that much, then why does he still spend so much time at their house? Stephen has always been a hard-working person. He built his career for many years, rising through the ranks, sparing no effort and time. Working in one of the large companies, he got used to stability and was confident that he could provide his family with everything they needed. But one day, everything changed. The company he worked for was facing serious financial problems. Cuts began, salary delays began, and constant talk about restructuring began. Stephen was among those hit by budget cuts. His income dropped sharply, and he realized that the financial situation in the family needed to be reviewed. Rachel, unlike him, never aspired to a full-time career. She only worked part-time at a local art gallery, more for fun than money. This always suited their family as long as Stephen could cover all expenses. But now the situation has changed. We need to cut costs, Stephen said over dinner, putting down his fork. At least until I find something new. Rachel just rolled her eyes and sighed. You're being too dramatic, she replied. We can handle it. I am not going to change my usual way of life just because of temporary difficulties. Stephen clenched his jaw, but remained silent. He expected more understanding, but his wife didn't seem to take the problem seriously. She continued to live as if nothing had happened, continuing to plan trips, shopping, and going out as if their financial situation had not changed. The more he thought about it, the more irritated he became. In Rachel's eyes, he saw not concern, but rather irritation due to the fact that now she would not be able to spend money the way she was used to. He began to understand that he and his wife viewed life completely differently, and this frightened him more than the financial difficulties themselves. Stephen increasingly raised the topic of budget cuts. He understood that their financial situation was unstable and tried to convey this to Rachel. But the more he talked about it, the more he encountered her resistance. We need to be smarter about our spending, he said one evening, leafing through the bills. Until I find a more stable job, we should cut down on unnecessary expenses. Rachel looked up from her phone screen and looked at him with annoyance. This topic again. Stephen, we have always lived well, and I am not going to turn my life into endless savings. It's not my fault that your company laid off people. Stephen clenched his teeth, but restrained himself. He was used to her love for luxury, for expensive restaurants, for elite events, but before he could afford it. Now the situation has changed, but she didn't seem to want to notice it. It's not forever, he tried to explain. We just have to curb our appetites for now. I'm not asking you to give up everything, but maybe at least fewer events. Expensive parties, going to the opera, designer clothes, these are not the biggest needs now. Rachel leaned back on the couch, crossing her arms over her chest. Do you want me to sit at home and not go out, so that we can live like the poor? I'm used to a certain standard of living, Stephen, and I'm not going to give it up. He felt irritation rise in his chest. Her words sounded like a reproach, as if he was to blame for their situation. He was the one who provided for their family for years, who built a career, who did everything to ensure that they lived in abundance. And now that difficult times had come, she didn't even want to try to adjust. Is this really that important to you? He asked quietly. Can't we just live more modestly for a while? That's not why I got married, she answered coldly and turned her attention to the phone again. This phrase hit Stephen harder than he expected. He realized that they looked at life completely differently, and this gap between them became deeper and deeper. The following weeks passed in constant disputes. Stephen watched as Rachel continued to spend money, ignoring his requests. She bought expensive dresses, ordered tickets to private events, and paid for dinners in prestigious restaurants. It seemed to him that she was doing this on purpose, as if to demonstrate that she would not allow financial difficulties to limit her lifestyle. You're not listening to me at all, he said one evening when he received another notification of a large debit from their bank account. Do you understand that we cannot afford such expenses? It's temporary, Rachel answered lightly. You'll soon find a new job, and everything will be the same again. What if it doesn't? His voice became firmer. What if I need time? Why can't you show some understanding? Rachel rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. You act like we're ruined. We still live in a nice house. We have money. Stop whining, Stephen. You've always been so practical, but now you're acting like a coward. Stephen fell silent. He had nothing more to say. At that moment, he realized that Rachel not only didn't understand him, she was simply not interested. In her eyes, he looked pathetic, and his worries were insignificant. The gap between them was no longer just widening. It was becoming irresistible. Rachel couldn't accept the fact that they had to cut costs. Her irritation grew every day, and the house became tense. The slightest mention of money ended in a quarrel. She complained that her usual way of life was collapsing and blamed it on Stephen. I'm tired of this, she exclaimed one evening, throwing her purchases forcefully onto the table. I'm not going to deny myself everything for the rest of my life. This is not the life I imagined. Do you think I like this? Stephen could hardly control his voice anymore. I'm doing everything possible to stabilize the situation. But instead of supporting me, you act like a spoiled child. Yes, I want to live as before. Rachel interrupted him sharply. I'm tired of counting money and worrying about every expense. This is humiliating. Stephen took a deep breath, trying to calm himself, but a feeling of powerlessness grew inside him. He understood that Rachel did not want to compromise, that it was not their family that bothered her, but the loss of comfort. Rachel pursed her lips, but instead of answering, she grabbed her phone and sent someone a message. Half an hour later, Alex appeared at their house. As always, he was there. As always, he listened to her complaints, nodded, and assented. He again played the role of comforter when Stephen felt that at that moment he himself needed support. You understand that she's used to a certain standard of living, Alex said calmly, turning to Stephen. Maybe you should be more flexible. Stephen clenched his fists, his patience running out. Flexible? He asked, looking coldly at his friend. Do you even understand what situation we find ourselves in? I have lost my stability, and instead of adapting, she continues to live as if nothing happened. These are just temporary difficulties, Alex sighed. You'll find a new job, but for now, maybe you shouldn't put so much pressure on her. Press? Stephen couldn't help himself. She spends money as if they were printing it. Do you think this is normal? Alex shook his head, pretending to try to diffuse the situation. I just want to say that it's hard for her. She needs time. Does she need time? Stephen smiled bitterly. Or maybe she needs you. You're always there, Alex. Maybe that's why it's so easy for her to complain. She always has someone to tell her I'm wrong. Alex narrowed his eyes, but didn't answer. He knew he couldn't convince Stephen, but he had no intention of leaving. This was not just a consolation, he was too involved in everything that was happening. Silence hung in the room. Rachel and Alex exchanged glances. At this point, Stephen realized that his friend was taking his wife's side too often. Despite their recent arguments, Rachel continued to act as if nothing had happened. But when she once again started talking about the upcoming charity event, Stephen's patience ran out. I think we should go to a charity event, she said over dinner, lazily swirling a glass of wine in her hands. This is an important event. All our friends will be there. We can't miss it. Stephen looked up from his thoughts and looked at her incredulously. Are you serious? You want to spend a lot of money on some event when our finances are not even in order? Rachel sighed in annoyance and rolled her eyes. It's just one evening, Stephen. And this is not just some kind of event, this is a status. If we stop showing up at these events, people will start to think there's something wrong with us. Because there is something wrong with us, he flared up. We can't afford to waste money on meaningless social events when we have problems. This is not a meaningless party, she snapped. This is an opportunity to maintain connections that may be useful in the future. If we disappear from the radar, we will be forgotten. Stephen sighed heavily, trying to control his irritation. He felt himself slipping back into an endless argument in which Rachel did not want to acknowledge the reality. You know what? He said, wearily rubbing his temples. Do what you want. Since it's so important for you to appear in front of people, go ahead. But I'm not going to spend my last money so that you can shine among those who don't care about us. Rachel stood up from the table and crossed her arms over her chest. If you don't want to go, I'll go alone, she said coldly. At least there will be people there who understand what it means to live with dignity. Worthy? He asked with mockery. This is called spending money that you don't have in order to appear better to someone than you are. Oh, stop lecturing me. Rachel raised her hands irritably. I'm tired of this rationality of yours. Not everything in life is measured by a budget. You yourself always said that status matters. Stephen rose sharply from his chair, resting his palms on the table. Status. Status will not help pay bills when there is no money left. Maybe instead of thinking about how to show off in front of these snobs, you think about how we can actually cope with the situation. Rachel snorted and stepped back. That's why it's impossible to talk to you. You're turning everything into a damn tragedy. I just want to forget about all this nonsense for at least one evening." Stephen shook his head. "Forget it," he muttered. "Do what you want." He turned and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing in angry silence. He didn't want to argue anymore. He felt that each such conversation only increased the distance between them, and this distance was already becoming insurmountable. Stephen thought the argument with Rachel was finally over, but she wasn't about to give up. The next day at breakfast, she returned to the topic of the charity event. "I talked to Alex," she began carefully, watching her husband's reaction. "He offered to pay for our participation in the evening. He said that it was not a problem, and we could return the money when everything worked out for us." Stephen set his coffee cup down on the table, a little harder than he intended. "Are you kidding? Are you really discussing our financial problems with Alex?" His voice was cold. "And he, of course, immediately offered to help." "How noble." "You don't need to react like that," Rachel frowned. "He just wants to help. This is not a gift, but temporary support. We can return the money later." Stephen looked at her carefully, then turned his gaze to the plate, as if considering the situation. "So now I have to be in debt to Alex," he said slowly. "Wonderful. He has already taken a place in our house, and now he also sponsors our outings. Why do you take everything so painfully?" Rachel clasped her hands. "It's just money. He is our friend." Stephen chuckled. "Money is never just money, especially when it's not yours." He leaned forward, looking her straight in the eyes. "Don't you think so?" She looked away, but continued to stand her ground. "I think you're complicating the situation," she said more quietly. "This is just an opportunity to save face without abandoning the event." "To save face in front of whom?" asked Stephen. "In front of those people who absolutely don't care about us? Or in front of Alex, who every day is getting closer to you than me?" Rachel exhaled sharply, her lips pressed into a thin line. "If you don't want to go, don't go. But I'll go." Stephen looked at her, feeling his irritation give way to dull disappointment. "Are you serious? Are you ready to go there, knowing that I'm against it?" He frowned. "Do you understand what this looks like?" "You know what? Yes, I'll go," she answered sharply. "And if you don't want to, Alex will keep me company." There was silence in the room. Stephen was silent, trying to cope with a surging wave of rage. She didn't even try to hide how comfortable she was around Alex. He stood up, put his cup in the sink, and walked out of the kitchen, leaving her standing in angry silence. He felt that this quarrel was not just about money or an event. It was about something much bigger, about power, about who makes decisions in their marriage. And Stephen began to realize that control had long been slipping out of his hands. The evening of the charity event was approaching, and a tense atmosphere filled the house. Rachel was engrossed in preparation, sorting through dresses, choosing jewelry, finding the perfect shoes. There was a gleam of excitement in her eyes, as if she was worried not so much about the event itself as about the opportunity to be the center of attention again. She stopped in front of the mirror, trying on earrings, and smiled at her reflection. Stephen watched her from behind the door, crossing his arms over his chest. "Are you really going to go there?" His voice was restrained, but irritation was felt in it. Rachel didn't turn around, continuing to study herself in the mirror. "Stephen, how much can you?" she said irritably. "I already said that I would go. You yourself refused, so don't try to convince me to do the same." "I don't understand why you need this." His voice became lower. "We can't afford it, and you know it." "Alex has already paid for our tickets," she answered calmly, applying the last layer of lipstick. "So you can relax. This won't change anything in our budget." Stephen felt anger building inside him. He hated this feeling, the feeling that someone else was taking on the role of a caring husband, while he himself remained on the sidelines. "Alex, Alex, Alex," he muttered through his teeth. "Is he your personal sponsor now? Maybe I'm not needed in this house at all." Rachel turned to him sharply, her eyes flashing with anger. "Enough, Stephen. You're acting like a child. Alex is just helping us because you can't do it. Temporary difficulties do not make me incapable." He barked, clenching his fists. "I'm your husband, not him. Do you even realize what this looks like? I don't care what it looks like, she shouted back. I'm tired of your whining and constant talk about how we don't have money. You yourself chose not to go, so I will go with someone who wants to share this evening with me. Before Stephen had time to answer, there was a knock on the door. He already knew who it was. Rachel quickly grabbed her clutch, took a deep breath, and headed out. Stephen followed slowly, and when he opened the door, Alex was standing on the threshold. He looked confident in an expensive suit with a slight grin, as if he was amused by the whole situation. Are you ready? He asked, glancing briefly at Stephen. Of course, Rachel replied, casting a parting glance at her husband. Don't wait for me. Stephen stood in the doorway, watching her leave, taking Alex's arm. He saw him whispering something in her ear, making her laugh. His hands clenched into fists. At that moment, he realized that something in his marriage had finally broken. But if she thought he would just accept it, she was sadly mistaken. After Rachel left, leaving behind only the smell of expensive perfume and silence in the house, Stephen stood at the window for a long time, looking into emptiness. He tried to calm down, but indignation was seething inside him. Everything that had happened in recent weeks weighed on him with incredible force. But that wasn't what worried him most. Dad, a quiet voice came from behind. He turned around and saw Jenny, their 14-year-old daughter. She stood in the doorway, barefoot, wearing her favorite old rock band t-shirt. Her dark eyes studied him carefully, and alarm was visible in them. Are you awake? He asked, trying to sound calm. How can I sleep if you screamed? She lowered her eyes. Is it because of the money, or because of Alex? Stephen involuntarily clenched his jaw, but quickly pulled himself together. He didn't want to involve his daughter in their adult problems, but he wasn't going to lie to her either. It's just, Mom and I have differences, he sighed, coming closer. Sometimes adults fight, but that doesn't mean you have to worry about it. Jenny snorted and crossed her arms over her chest. Is it true? Then why did Mom leave with Alex and you were left here alone? Stephen didn't immediately find what to say. His daughter was smart, too smart to simply brush off her questions. She wanted to go to the event, but I didn't. That's all, he answered briefly, but he himself understood how pitiful it sounded. Jenny shook her head and walked closer. Dad, I see that everything is wrong. You argue constantly. You look angry and tired. And Mom, she's acting strange. Stephen ran his hand over his face. He didn't expect the conversation to go this far, but perhaps this was the moment when he should be honest. Yes, it's a difficult period between us now, he admitted, but one thing I want you to know is that I will always be there for you. Whatever happens. Jenny nodded and suddenly hugged him. He felt her small arms squeeze him tighter than he expected. I just don't want you to be alone, she whispered. Stephen closed his eyes and hugged his daughter back. He understood that his marriage was collapsing, but at least he wasn't going to lose the most important thing he had left. After a tense conversation with his daughter, Stephen decided they both needed a little time away. They turned on the TV and settled down on the couch, choosing a movie that didn't require much attention. Jenny snuggled up to him, wrapped in a warm blanket, and for a while the house was filled with familiar comfort. Stephen tried to focus on the screen, but his thoughts continued to revolve around Rachel. He remembered how she got ready, with what indifference she rejected his requests, how easily she left with Alex. Jenny seemed to notice his absent-mindedness, but said nothing. She just watched the movie, occasionally glancing at him briefly. Dad, I guess I'll go to bed, she finally said, yawning and rubbing her eyes. It's already late. Stephen looked at his watch. Indeed, it was already long after midnight. Of course, honey. Good night, he kissed the top of her head. Good night, Dad, she answered quietly and headed to her room. When Jenny disappeared through the door, Stephen was left alone in the darkness of the living room. The TV was still on, filling the silence with inexpressive dialogue, but he no longer paid attention to it. Sleep did not come. Thoughts buzzed in my head like an annoying swarm of bees. He tried to convince himself that this was all temporary, that he was just tired, that Rachel couldn't just end their marriage. After another hour of struggling with insomnia, he finally turned off the TV and went to the bedroom. He lay down on the bed, but as soon as he closed his eyes, every sound in the house seemed louder to him than usual. It took him almost half an hour to fall asleep, but suddenly some noise woke him up. A dull sound, as if someone had opened a door or touched furniture downstairs. My heart sank, my breathing became labored. He listened, hoping that it was just his imagination, but the silence was broken again, this time more clearly. Someone was in the house. Stephen held his breath, not moving. The noise below became more and more distinct. He heard the front door slam shut, then the sound of uneven footsteps down the corridor. Rachel's voice echoed through the house. She was clearly drunk. "Come on, Alex, just a little more," she stammered, her words slurring together and her laughter loud and uncontrollable. "The evening was great. Why end it? Let's have another drink." "Rachel," Alex's voice was muffled, but Stephen heard it well enough. "It's already late. It's time for you to rest, and for me to go home. And be quiet. You'll wake Stephen." Stephen clenched his fists tighter, standing in the shadow of the stairs so they wouldn't know he was watching. He couldn't see their faces, but he could feel everything: the smell of alcohol, the lazy mannerism in his wife's voice, her desire to continue the celebration, and his friend, who seemed to be trying to take control of the situation. "Oh, what is he, a saint, or what?" Rachel snorted loudly. "If he wakes up, so what? Maybe he can finally relax. Otherwise, he just whines and complains." Stephen felt something inside him snap. She didn't just come home late and drunk. She came with his best friend, with someone who was once almost like a brother to him. And this brother was now trying to persuade his wife to be quieter so that he wouldn't notice anything. "SHSHSH, let's not make noise." Alex spoke softly but insistently. "It's late, you need to go to bed. It's time for me to go home." "You're such a bore," Rachel sighed and, judging by the sound, staggered. "That's why I didn't want to leave the party. It was fun there, but here it's boring." There was the sound of footsteps, but then there was silence. "Alex, maybe you'll stay." Her voice became lower, almost purring. "Well, at least for a while. Cheer me up, will you?" There was playfulness in her tone, but Stephen heard something more in it. "Rachel, you don't know what you're saying," Alex replied with obvious tension in his voice. "You drank too much." "So what? Don't I deserve to have fun?" There was a sound of movement, as if she had taken a step closer to him. "Come on, relax. You like being with me, don't you?" "Damn it, Rachel, stop it." Alex tried to pull away. "This is not. This is wrong." "Come on," she laughed quietly. "Only you always understand me. You are not like him. You know what I mean." "You don't know what you're saying." Alex's voice sounded tense. "Go to bed, Rachel. You've had too much." "I?" She laughed, but the laughter came out somehow empty, without joy. "Just be honest, Alex. You think about me sometimes, don't you?" He was silent. The silence lasted a few seconds, but to Stephen it seemed like an eternity. Then he heard Alex carefully but firmly break the distance between them. "I'm leaving," he said, his voice sounding harsher than before. "Good night, Rachel." There was the sound of footsteps and then a door closing. Alex left. Stephen continued to stand in the darkness, restraining himself so as not to reveal his presence. He wanted to fully understand how far all this had gone, and what he had already heard was enough to make him never look at those two the same way again. Rachel stood there for a few seconds, then staggered towards the kitchen. He heard her open the refrigerator and the glass clink on the countertop. A minute later, she slowly moved upstairs, and soon the house was silent again. But Stephen could no longer sleep. He just sat in the dark, feeling his anger building into something more. Something inside him completely broke, and now he knew that he would no longer allow these two to act as if he didn't notice anything. Stephen did not sleep until almost dawn. His thoughts raced from anger to frustration, from the desire to grab things and leave to the cold realization that he could not afford to act rashly just yet. He heard Rachel finally fall asleep somewhere towards morning, and he sat in the dark for a long time, listening to the rhythmic ticking of the clock. When he finally got out of bed and headed to the kitchen, the house was flooded with muted morning light. He poured himself some coffee, stirring mechanically with a spoon, and then heard Rachel coming down the stairs. She looked broken, disheveled hair, dark circles under her eyes, movements slow and sluggish. The hangover was clearly making itself felt, but despite this, there was not a shadow of shame or regret on her face. "Good morning," she muttered, yawning and stretching. "It dries terribly." Stephen watched silently as she walked to the refrigerator, pulled out a bottle of water, and took a few greedy sips. She didn't seem to care at all that yesterday she returned home in the early morning, drunk, accompanied by his former best friend. "How long have you been up?" she asked, noticing his gaze. "Long enough to think about everything," he answered calmly, taking a sip of coffee. She froze for a second, but then shrugged as if his words didn't matter to her. "Well, what were you thinking about?" she asked with a slight grin, putting the bottle on the table. Stephen placed the cup on the table so that the ceramic thudded against the surface. "About how your evening went, for example." His voice was even, but cold. Rachel rolled her eyes. "Oh my God, Stephen, don't start. You yourself refused to go. I just had fun, that's all." "Yes, I noticed," he nodded. "You were having so much fun that you didn't even realize how you were acting." She looked at him with slight irritation. "And what does this mean?" "Nothing," he shrugged, watching her reaction. "Just an observation." Rachel frowned, but decided not to pursue the topic. She took a couple more sips of water, then reached for her phone, as if searching for something more important than their conversation. "Do you have any plans for today?" he asked, watching her scroll through the screen. "Yes," she answered absently. "I need to buy something, then maybe I'll meet the girls." Stephen nodded, but everything was boiling inside. She didn't even try to hide her indifference to what was happening between them. The tension in the air became almost palpable. They were in the same house, but it seemed that there was an abyss between them. And Stephen understood, this is just the beginning. Stephen returned home later than usual. He deliberately stayed late after work, wandered the streets, went into a cafe, and drank coffee alone. He simply did not want to return to this house, to the atmosphere of cold silence and constant tension. It was only a few days after the charity evening, but from then on things got even worse. Rachel continued to act as if nothing had happened. She didn't ask questions, didn't try to talk, as if she didn't notice how far they had moved away from each other. Or maybe she just didn't care. When he finally approached the front door and inserted the key into the lock, he heard muffled sounds coming from inside. He recognized Rachel's voice, but there was no one else in the house. She was talking on the phone. Stephen was about to come in, but something in her tone made him freeze. "I'm just tired," Rachel sighed. "You have to save money all the time, think about where to cut costs. It's infuriating. That's not why I got married." Stephen tensed. It was as if something was squeezing in my chest. He knew she was unhappy, but hearing it out loud, and even said to someone else, was completely different. "I understand you," he heard a voice from the speaker. It was her friend, possibly Maggie. "But you knew that Stephen was having difficulties now. It's not forever." "I don't care how long it takes," Rachel said irritably. "I'm used to living differently. I'm tired of denying myself everything. I want to go out somewhere normally, not think about prices, not listen to his whining about the budget. It's endless." "Well, what does he say? Is he even trying to solve the problem?" asked a friend. "Yes, he's just fixated on his failures," Rachel snorted. "Every time it's the same thing. We have to be patient. Everything will get better soon." "But when? I'm no longer interested in enduring. I want to live normally as before, without these stupid restrictions." "Does he even understand that you think so?" Maggie clarified carefully. "Of course not." Rachel grinned. "He still lives in his own little world, where I have to support him in everything, even if I don't like it. And if I'm against it, then I'm a bad wife. As if I don't have the right to want better." Stephen clenched his jaw. He felt his fingers curl into fists. This wasn't just a conversation. It was a frank, unsparing look at who he had become in the eyes of his wife. "Well, maybe you should talk to him sometime," my friend suggested hesitantly, "so that he understands your position." "What's the point?" Rachel snorted. "He will either continue to whine or start playing the offended husband. I've already been through this. He won't change. He is simply not the kind of person who is capable of living differently." Stephen felt his chest tighten at that cold phrase. Everything was boiling inside. She didn't just complain about their situation. She talked about him as if he were something temporary, something insignificant, something she no longer took seriously. He couldn't listen anymore. Slowly stepping back, he took a deep breath. For the first time in a long time, he felt not just disappointment, but an icy realization. Rachel no longer perceived their family as something valuable. She saw him only as a source of problems. After that conversation that Stephen accidentally overheard, something changed inside him. He no longer looked at Rachel the same way. In his gaze, there were no more attempts to understand her. There was no desire to smooth over the corners. Only the cold realization that the woman he once fought for now sees him only as a burden. But he didn't make a scene. He didn't want to give her a reason to make him look inadequate or offended. Instead, he silently pulled away. He began to talk to her less, stopped being interested in her plans, her thoughts, her mood. He stopped trying to please, stopped asking what she needed. He just lived nearby, but was no longer part of her world. Rachel seemed to notice the change, but didn't try to discuss it. She was satisfied that he did not bother with questions and did not interfere with her life as she was used to. They began to behave like neighbors connected only by common walls. But there was one detail that still connected them: Jenny. One evening, while Rachel was out with her friends again, Stephen was sitting in the living room, scrolling through the news on his phone. He heard light footsteps and raised his head. Jenny stood in the doorway. "Why aren't you sleeping?" he asked, putting the phone away. "I don't want to," she shrugged, coming closer. "Can I sit with you?" "Of course, honey." He patted the sofa next to him. She sat down, tucked her legs under her and sighed. "Did something happen?" he asked, looking at her. "No, it's just." She paused, choosing her words. "You behave differently." Stephen frowned. "In what sense?" "You have become different. You hardly talk to your mom. You haven't done this before." Stephen took a deep breath. He didn't want to drag his daughter into adult problems, but he wasn't going to lie to her either. "Sometimes people change," he answered after a pause, "especially when they start to see things differently." Jenny looked at him carefully, as if she was trying to peer into his thoughts. "Are you and your mother quarreling?" she asked carefully. "No," he answered honestly. "We just began to look at life differently." She nodded, but there was concern in her eyes. "You won't get divorced, will you?" she asked quietly. Stephen looked at her. He wanted to say that no, that they would sort it out, but he wasn't sure. "Everything will be fine," he said, pulling her towards him. "I promise." Jenny clung to him, and he realized that now he had one goal: to make sure that his daughter did not suffer from the chaos that was growing in their family. Stephen didn't notice the changes right away, but gradually they became too obvious to ignore. Alex began to appear in their house more and more often. He came even when Stephen was not at home, and what was most irritating was that Rachel was not at all bothered by it. At first, he thought it was just an accident. Alex would come in under the pretext of helping with something or just stopping by for coffee. But then he began to notice that this was happening more and more often. Some days, when he returned home, he found 2 cups of coffee in the sink, or there were traces of 2 glasses of wine on the table. One day, Jenny, innocently, without a second thought, said at dinner, "Alex came by today. He was telling his mother about a new restaurant in the center." Stephen became wary. "Today? When?" "Somewhere after lunch." "He stayed for a long time, it seems," the daughter shrugged. Stephen glanced at Rachel, but she just shrugged. "Yes, I came. We were just chatting." "We were just chatting. But why? Why was Alex in their house so often when he himself was not there? And why didn't Rachel even try to hide this fact by acting like it was normal?" Every week, the situation only got worse. Alex appeared so often now that Stephen felt like a stranger in his own home. Rachel no longer asked if he would be home, she simply made decisions for him. It was annoying. It made me angry. This awakened something in him that he had not felt for a long time, a cold, burning feeling of jealousy. He couldn't be sure what infuriated him more, the fact that Alex felt so secure in their home, or the fact that Rachel didn't see a problem with it at all. Stephen wasn't keen on the idea of going to another party, but Rachel insisted. She said they needed to unwind and that it would be fun. He knew it was just an excuse. She wanted to plunge back into the familiar atmosphere of luxury, expensive alcohol, and endless conversations about nothing. But there was no point in arguing. He was tired of their endless conflicts and simply followed her, hoping that this evening would pass without unnecessary shocks. When they arrived at the event, the hall was already filled with people. Live jazz played, waiters passed glasses of champagne, and guests laughed and enjoyed the evening. The smell of expensive perfume mixed with the aromas of elite whiskey and wine hung in the air. Rachel looked pleased she was finally in an environment where she felt like a duck to water. She instantly joined the crowd, exchanging greetings, blowing kisses, and casual conversations. Stephen, on the other hand, felt like an outsider. He stayed away, standing at the bar and watching his wife. The whiskey was bitter in my mouth, but it helped quell the irritation. His gaze darted around the hall until he noticed a familiar figure. Alex. He appeared towards the middle of the evening, and, as if on cue, Rachel was immediately next to him. They quickly fell into animated conversation, laughing and looking at each other as if the rest of the world had simply ceased to exist. Alex said something in her ear, and she laughed, lightly touching his shoulder. Something tightened in Stephen's chest. And then the dancing began. It was Alex who first pulled Rachel onto the dance floor. She grinned and took his hand without hesitation, allowing her to be led to the center of the hall. They moved easily, smoothly, as if they had known each other's rhythm for a long time. She laughed, snuggling a little closer to him than normal friends should. Her hand lingered on his shoulder longer than necessary. She leaned towards his ear, whispering something, and he answered her with the same relaxed smile. Stephen watched this, squeezing his glass so tightly that the glass might break. He saw how she looked at Alex with the same look with which she had once looked at him. He didn't even need to hear their conversation to understand that there was something more than friendship between them. It was a feeling on the verge of intuition, but it hit the very heart. A few minutes passed, then another, but Rachel did not return to him. She seemed completely lost in the dance, her body moving smoothly to the beat of the music, and Alex held her waist a little lower than it should have been. Stephen suddenly found it difficult to breathe. He put down his glass and walked along the hall to catch his breath. But even when he stopped at the window and breathed in the cool air, the tension did not let go. A familiar voice came from behind. "Why are you so gloomy?" asked one of our mutual friends, patting him on the shoulder. "Your wife looks like she's having a great time." Stephen didn't answer. He looked towards the dance floor again. There, in the circle of soft light, Alex leaned closer to Rachel than he should have. She didn't pull away. On the contrary, she seemed to enjoy it. Her every gesture, every laugh, every touch, it was all like a mockery. And the longer he looked, the more he realized he was losing control. Above her, above the situation, above yourself. The return home passed in complete silence. Stephen sat behind the wheel, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned white. Rachel acted as if nothing had happened. She was silent, but there was a slight irritation in her gaze, as if she was tired of the very need to be near her husband after such a wonderful evening. As soon as the car stopped at the house, Rachel quickly got out, slamming the door so hard that something rattles inside. Stephen paused for a moment, taking a deep breath before following her inside. "Well, what the hell was that?" he barked, slamming the door with such force that the echo echoed throughout the house. Rachel had already kicked off her shoes and grabbed a bottle of wine from the bar. She glanced at him over the top of her glass, taking a leisurely sip. "What is this?" Her voice was lazy, with a challenge, as if he was asking about some trifle. Are you serious? Stephen crossed his arms over his chest. You've been hanging on to Alex all evening. Dancing, laughter, these fucking touches. Do you even realize what it looked like? Rachel rolled her eyes and leaned back on the couch. Oh, stop it, Stephen. It's just dancing. Or are you so unhappy that everything now seems like a threat to you? Maybe I should even wear a burqa so that your pride doesn't suffer. Just dancing, he asked, slowly approaching. Didn't you see what it looked like from the outside? Or are you just okay? Is everything smooth? She grinned and took another sip. Yes, Stephen, everything is fine with me. I don't care about your offended looks, about your how could you. I want to live a normal life and not count every penny and listen to you eat your fucking pride. Stephen clenched his fists until his nails dug into his palms. Maybe because everything is really going wrong for us. His voice became harsh, almost growling. Do you even notice what's going on? Or is it more convenient for you to pretend that everything is fine while you wiggle your ass in front of Alex? Rachel slammed her glass down on the table. Fuck you. What will you do to me, huh? Another lecture about how I've gotten bad, about what a bad wife I am. Can you even hear yourself? I want you to at least pretend that you don't give a damn about our damn marriage, he roared. She looked at him for a few seconds, then laughed dryly, without joy. Marriage. Stephen, this is no longer a marriage. This is a farce. Stephen didn't answer. He just stood and looked at her, and an icy feeling slowly flared up in his chest. She has already decided everything for herself. And he also began to make decisions. Sex between them has long ceased to be what it used to be. Once upon a time, their attraction was stormy, alive, real. They could do this at any time of the day, simply because they could not get enough of each other. But now everything has changed. Stephen couldn't remember the last time Rachel really wanted him. Not because it's time, not because it's been a long time, but because I longed for him as before. She no longer looked at him the way she once did, with a look full of desire and sparkle. Now he met only cold detachment. Every attempt to get closer ended with either excuses or a strained, I'm tired, or complete indifference. Sometimes, even when they did have sex, it was like a mechanical ritual without passion, without real pleasure. She let him do his thing, lying there with a blank expression on her face, and Stephen felt pathetic. He once thought that everything would pass, that it was just stress, just a routine, just a period. But the more time passed, the more he realized the problem was not work, not fatigue, not mood. The problem was that she simply didn't want him anymore. And the worst part was the realization that maybe she wanted someone else. Stephen increasingly caught himself feeling that he was superfluous in his own home. Once he was the center of this family, the head, the support, but now it seemed to him that he was simply pushed aside, especially when it came to Jenny. Alex started spending too much time with her. He appeared more often than Stephen himself could afford because of his work, bringing small gifts, either a new phone, expensive sneakers, or tickets to a concert of her favorite band. Jenny beamed with joy as she talked about how great Alex was and how he understood her better than anyone. Stephen didn't know how to react. He saw how his daughter, his flesh and blood, became more and more attached to another man who behaved as if he were the real father. When Stephen reprimanded Jenny or tried to set boundaries, she became protective of Alex. Dad, what's wrong with you? Alex just helps. He cares about me, unlike some, she once said, going to her room, slamming the door. These words hit him harder than a fist to the face. He sat in silence, aware of how everything was slowly falling apart. He was losing more than just his wife. He was losing his family, lost my daughter. Stephen increasingly noticed how Rachel began to disappear in the evenings. At first, it seemed harmless. I'm meeting girls, work has been delayed, I need to stop by the mall. But over time, it began to turn into a system. She returned late, often with a slight smell of alcohol. Her mood was high, and she answered Stephen's questions abruptly, as if the conversation with him was irritating her. At first, he tried not to pay attention, attributing everything to stress or her desire to be away from home. But then small details appeared that hurt his eyes. She increasingly wore sexy lingerie not for him. Her perfume became sharper, more expensive. She spent more time in the mirror before going out, and when she returned, she didn't even bother to explain where she was. One day, he deliberately returned home earlier than usual, but there was no one at home. No wife, no daughter. He took out his phone and texted her. "Where are you?" The answer did not come immediately. 10 minutes later. "Went out with Maggie. Everything is fine." Maggie, Stephen chuckled. He knew Maggie was in another state this week. He didn't write about it, but his fingers tightened on the phone. What else is she lying to him? What made the situation worse was that Alex was becoming more and more confident. If before he came to their house with some caution, now he acted as if it was his territory. Without hesitation, he took glasses out of the cabinet, poured himself a drink, turned on the TV, and even sat in Stephen's favorite chair, as if he always did this. "Why are you so tense, buddy?" he said once, grinning when Stephen looked at him for too long. "Relax. Life is short, you know." Stephen didn't answer, but he was seething inside. He saw the way Alex looked at Rachel, the way they exchanged glances, the way she touched his hand a little longer than necessary. He was no fool. He knew something was happening, but he couldn't catch their hand yet. Several times he noticed Alex bringing her home. The damn bastard didn't even try to hide. On the contrary, he looked like he was deliberately showing his presence. One day, as he pulled up to the house, Stephen walked out onto the porch and saw Alex leaning over to Rachel, whispering something to her, and she was laughing and lightly touching his shoulder. Stephen wanted to go up and punch him right in the jaw, but he restrained himself. Bye. A few days later, the situation repeated itself. Rachel was delayed again. Stephen decided not to write to her, not to ask. He just sat in the darkness of the living room, waiting for her to come. When she finally opened the door, the clock showed past midnight. There was a slight smile on her face, her lips were slightly swollen, and her hair was tousled, as if someone else's hands had touched them. "Where have you been?" His voice was quiet but firm. "Oh my God, Stephen, are you following me?" She rolled her eyes tiredly. "I was just walking. What now should I report for every step?" He slowly rose from his chair, continuing to look at her. "Maybe it's not necessary, but at least don't lie to me." She froze for a second, but immediately straightened up, crossing her arms defiantly over her chest. "You're screwing yourself over. Stop it." He smiled bitterly. "Do you have any idea what you look like when you come home like this? Happy, drunk, with a smile from ear to ear. When was the last time you smiled like that while looking at me?" Rachel sighed in annoyance and walked into the kitchen, picking up a glass and pouring herself some wine. "Oh God, it's starting. Maybe you should just relax. We still don't live like a normal couple anymore." Stephen slowly walked towards her, resting his hands on the tabletop, towering over her. "Well, say it out loud. Come on, tell me that I am no one else for you. That you're just waiting for the right moment for me to leave so you can safely fuck with your friend." Rachel flinched slightly, but immediately pretended not to care again. "You're unbearable, Stephen," she said, and, taking the glass, went into the bedroom, leaving him standing in the kitchen. Stephen ran his hand over his face, feeling his insides burn with anger. Now he had no doubts, and he was ready to find out the whole truth, no matter how vile it turned out to be. Stephen couldn't just wait any longer. Suspicions turned into an obsessive thought that was impossible to get rid of. He began to control Rachel. Every time she left the house, she was now accompanied by his attention. He began to notice every detail: what time she left, when she returned, how often she checked her phone, and how easily she managed to lie to his face. He no longer believed a single word she said. At first, she tried to act as if she did not notice his gaze, but he saw how her manner of speaking changed, how she became more cautious. When he asked who she was with, she always answered casually, too quickly, as if she had already prepared the answer. She seemed annoyed that he was even asking questions. "Who were you with?" He said one day when she returned late, the smell of alcohol mixed with her expensive perfume. With friends, she answered tiredly, kicking off her shoes. Which ones? He crossed his arms over his chest, watching her reaction. Rachel exhaled in annoyance and rolled her eyes. With Maggie and Kate. Interesting, Stephen grinned. Because Maggie has been in Miami for 2 weeks, and Kate told me yesterday that she hasn't left the house. She froze for a second, but then frowned. Are you interrogating me? You've become kind of paranoid. No, I'm just tired of your lies. His voice was calm, but icy. Are you cheating on me, Rachel? She chuckled and shook her head. You're unbearable, Stephen. This is getting pathetic. He didn't answer. He knew there was no point in arguing with her now, but he continued to watch. He checked her phone, noticed how she abruptly snatches it out of her hands if he accidentally puts it next to her. He kept track of her accounts, paid attention to new purchases, expensive jewelry and lingerie, which she definitely did not wear for him. More and more details pointed to the same thing. Her irritation grew every day. At first she made excuses, then she got angry, and then she just started avoiding conversations. She began to come later and later, and sometimes did not answer calls at all. One day he noticed that her car was parked at their house, but she was not inside. She returned an hour later, disheveled and with a slight blush on her cheeks. Where have you been? His voice sounded harsher than he expected. None of your business, she snorted and walked past. Stephen understood everything. He's not a fool. But he needed the truth. Stephen was waiting for her at home again. The clock showed 2 in the morning, but she was still not there. He sat in the darkness of the living room, slowly turning a glass of unfinished whiskey in his hands. At some point, he heard the front door open. She entered, trying to move silently, but did not notice his silhouette in the chair. Where have you been? His voice sounded sharp, and she shuddered. I'm not going to discuss this anymore, she muttered, walking past him. Answer me, damn it. He grabbed her wrist, forcing her to stop. Rachel pulled her hand, but he didn't let go. Her eyes blazed with anger. Do you want the truth? She shouted, breaking free. Yes, Stephen, yes, I'm sleeping with Alex. Satisfied? Is this what you wanted to hear? He blinked as if he had been hit in the face. You're lying, he whispered, shaking his head. You just want to hurt me. Rachel grinned and folded her arms over her chest. Oh, poor thing, is it hard for you to believe this? Wake up, Stephen. You haven't meant anything to me for a long time. Alex is a man. He is not a pathetic whiner like you. Stephen felt his throat tighten, but he controlled himself. He exhaled slowly and then said with a deep laugh, You really fucking know this. She raised her eyebrows and laughed. Well, finally you understand it. Congratulations, Stephen. It's just a little late, huh? She turned and went into the bedroom. Tomorrow I will pick up my things. I'm going to Alex. At least he knows how to treat a woman. Stephen stood motionless, listening to her slam the bedroom door. He closed his eyes, clenching his fists. His breathing was slow, restrained, but everything was bubbling inside. Fuck you, he quietly exhaled, looking into the darkness. But that wasn't the end. This was the beginning. Divorce was a word that Stephen hated. It cut into the ear like a rusty knife, leaving deep wounds in the soul. Once upon a time, he had a family, he had love, he had a home that seemed like a fortress. But everything collapsed in one moment. Rachel betrayed him with someone he considered a brother. Alex, his best friend, the person he trusted, was the one who ruined his life. It was not just a blow, it was a war in which Stephen lost everything. At first he tried to fight. He screamed, hit walls, tried to understand how this could happen to him. He wanted an explanation, but Rachel simply shrugged and said that it happens. For her it was easy, for him it was unbearable. The divorce was messy. Disputes about the house, about money, about who will live with the daughter. Jenny, their common daughter, became a hostage of this war. When the moment of choice came, she chose to stay with her mother. This completely finished off Stephen. He knew that Rachel was turning her daughter against him, that she was making him out to be a tyrant and a loser. He saw Jenny moving away from him every day, and he couldn't do anything about it. He did not leave, as his friends advised him. He remained in this city, in this damned house, saturated with memories. Now he lived alone, surrounded by silence and what had once been his life. Resentment and anger were eating away at him from the inside, making him a shadow of himself. He tried to move on, but every evening he returned to an empty apartment where the only sounds were his own thoughts. But over time, the pain began to dull. He realized that his life was not over. He began to return to himself, albeit slowly. He knew there were still many battles ahead, but now he was ready to take them on. After the divorce, Stephen seemed to disappear. He did not seek meetings with his daughter, did not try to maintain contact. He knew that Jenny chose her mother, knew all the dirt that Rachel was telling about him, and deep down he couldn't forgive it. Resentment ate him up like poison. He didn't want to hear her voice, didn't want to see her face, reminding him of betrayal. But Jenny tried. She called him several times. The first time he just looked at the screen, at her name flashing on the display, and squeezed the phone in his hand until his fingers turned white. He didn't answer. The second time she left a message. "Dad, I just want to talk. Please call me back." Her voice was quiet, almost pleading, but he simply erased the recording and turned off the phone. He couldn't. He wasn't ready. One day she even came to his house. He heard the doorbell and froze. My heart started beating faster. He knew who it was. But instead of opening it, he slowly walked away from the door and sat down in a chair. I heard her stand there, knock again, and then turn around and leave. He felt like crap. But everything inside screamed that he couldn't. He can't just forget that his own daughter turned on him when he needed her most, even if she regretted it now. Several months have passed. There were no more calls, messages too. And suddenly Stephen realized that he himself had become what he hated, the man who had rejected the only person close to him. But could he change anything? Or was it already too late? Stephen resisted this moment for a long time, but something clicked inside. Maybe he was tired of the silence. Maybe he finally realized that he was blaming Jenny for something she shouldn't have been held accountable for. Or maybe he was just afraid that one day it would be too late. He dialed her number himself. I sat with the phone in my hand until the beep stopped. A cautious voice was heard on the phone. "Dad?" He swallowed as if he had forgotten how to talk. "Hello, Jenny." She was silent for several seconds. It seemed to him that she was trying to understand whether it was really him or her consciousness playing a cruel joke on her. Are you calling me?" she finally asked. "Yes, maybe we can meet." He said it quietly, but every word was difficult for him. He didn't know what exactly he wanted to say, but he knew he couldn't avoid it any longer. Jenny agreed immediately. They met in a small cafe. When Stephen saw her, his heart sank. She has grown up. She had matured over these months, and he had missed it. Jenny stood at the table, clutching a cup in her hands, and when he sat down opposite her, she smiled nervously. "You look good," he said quietly. "Thank you." She looked away, running her finger along the rim of the cup. There was silence, awkward, oppressive. He didn't know where to start. He wanted to say so much, but the words got stuck in his throat. "Why were you silent for so long?" she finally asked. "I called you. I wrote. I came to your house. And you just ignored me." Stephen closed his eyes and sighed. "I was angry. He didn't lie. I felt betrayed. It seemed to me that you chose your mother, that you turned your back on me." Jenny shook her head. Tears sparkled in her eyes. "I didn't choose Dad. I didn't know what to do with you. You were so angry, so cold. I was scared. I didn't want to lose you, but you yourself ruined everything." Stephen felt something inside him tremble. "Sorry," he barely squeezed out the word. It was bitter, like poison, but he knew he had to say it. Jenny nodded, swallowing back her tears. "I just want you in my life, Dad, even if it's not the same as before." Stephen looked at her. "To your daughter." And for the first time in a long time, I felt that perhaps all was not lost. "I want that too," he answered quietly. And at that moment, he realized that he had something to move on for. After meeting Jenny for the first time, something changed. She was no longer afraid to write to him, and he no longer allowed himself to ignore her. They started talking a little. At first it was short messages, then calls, and then they began to meet once a week. Stephen still didn't know how to make up for lost time, but at least he tried. He asked how she was doing at school, what her hobbies were, what her plans were. Jenny responded cautiously at first, but gradually became more open. She wanted to trust her father, and Stephen felt it. One day at dinner, she looked at him seriously and said, "Dad, I have to tell you something." Stephen put down his fork and looked at her carefully. "What's happened?" Jenny hesitated, but then took a deep breath. "Alex, he said bad things about you. All these months, from the very beginning, he said that you were worthless, that you were a failure, that you abandoned us. Mom, too. She never protected you. It seemed to me that you were really to blame for everything, but now I understand that it was not true." Stephen felt something flare up inside him. Anger. But he didn't let it get out. He looked at his daughter, trying to control himself. "And you believed him?" he asked quietly. Jenny nodded, pursing her lips. "Yes, but I was stupid. I was mad at you because you left, because you didn't talk to me. And Alex, he used it. He pretended that he was caring, that he cared. But now I see what he really was." Stephen clenched his fists, but sighed, trying to calm down. "Thank you for telling me that," he replied. "I'm sorry you went through that. But know one thing, I never gave up on you. I just didn't know how to be there when everything fell apart." Jenny nodded, a small smile appearing on her face. "I know, Dad. Now I know." Stephen realized that his battle was not over yet. But now he knew exactly whose side Jenny was on, and that meant everything. Stephen never considered himself a vindictive person, but everything that has happened in recent months has changed him. Alex didn't just betray him, he destroyed his family, stole his wife, and now it turns out that he also turned his daughter against him. This was the last straw. Stephen couldn't just watch anymore. He decided that Alex would pay, and he will pay in full. He wasn't going to cause scandals or hit people in the face, no, that would be too easy. Alex should have felt what Stephen felt: destruction, loss, loneliness, and he knew how to do it. Stephen began to study Alex's business. He knew that not everything was as smooth as it seemed. Alex loved to take risks, invested money in dubious projects, and was used to playing on the brink of a foul. But now the border will become a trap. The first thing Stephen did was find old acquaintances who had access to financial information. It turned out that Alex got into debt trying to pull off another scam. One wrong step and his business will collapse. Stephen began to gently push him towards the abyss. Through dummy people, he introduced the idea of a new investment project that promised huge profits. Alex, being the cocky idiot that he is, of course took the bait. He invested money there, taking out additional loans. The next step was to destroy his reputation. Through a network of anonymous sources, Stephen spread rumors about Alex's financial fraud. Large investors began to get nervous. One by one, they began to refuse to work with him. And the final blow was that Stephen contacted the tax office. He collected enough evidence to interest the right people. When the check came to Alex, he didn't even understand where the blow came from. Everything was falling apart. Alex's days in business were numbered. And when he realized that he was left with nothing, Stephen just grinned. This was not the end. This was just the beginning of his downfall. Stephen was sitting in the cafe, slowly stirring his coffee, when Jenny sat down in front of him. She looked worried, fiddling with the edge of her sleeve and avoiding his gaze. Stephen immediately realized that she had come for a reason. "Dad, did you hear?" she asked, finally looking into his eyes. "About what?" He answered calmly, pretending that he did not understand what was being said. Jenny sighed and leaned closer to the table, lowering her voice. "Alex has some problems. I heard my mother talking to someone on the phone. She was angry, saying that everything was falling apart. I tried to ask, but she waved me off. He says it's none of my business, but I can see that something is wrong." Stephen took a sip of his coffee, keeping his cool. A warm fire of satisfaction lit up inside him. Everything went according to plan. "Maybe he's just having business troubles," he shrugged. He always played on the edge. Sooner or later, this had to happen. "But this is something serious, Dad," Jenny insisted. "I've never seen my mother like this. She even snapped at me when I tried to figure out what was going on. I'm afraid we might lose our house. And Alex, he looks depressed. I don't understand what happened, but things are only getting worse." Stephen watched her silently. His daughter was genuinely scared. She didn't know that her father was the cause of all this chaos, but he couldn't give himself away. "I couldn't yet." "Jenny, don't worry," he said softly. "Everything will work out somehow. Maybe you should stay away for now and just watch." She frowned but nodded. She trusted him, as she always did, even if she didn't understand why he was so sure. Stephen took another sip, looking into her worried eyes. He already knew how this game would end, and he wondered how long Rachel and Alex could stay afloat before their world completely collapsed. While Alex's life was falling apart, Stephen's career was going up. He was no longer the man who had been betrayed and left to die alone. Now he was confident, cool, and purposeful. He felt the taste of victory again. His business expanded. New contracts, profitable deals, invitations to major events. Companies that had not even noticed him before now made contact themselves. He was no longer trying to keep up with someone. Now others were following him, trying to understand how he got up so quickly. Alex, on the other hand, was descending into chaos. His business was bursting at the seams, investors left one after another, the trust of his partners evaporated. There was a catastrophic shortage of money, and the banks no longer wanted to deal with him. He had to get out, look for new schemes, but the harder he fought, the deeper he got stuck in the swamp. Rachel felt it too. Their home was no longer the luxurious place she was used to. The money was no longer flowing in, and she began to get nervous. She increasingly lashed out at Alex, reproached him for his failures, and said that he had disappointed her. Alex tried to make excuses, but she didn't want to hear. Stephen knew his plans were working. He saw how Alex was slowly losing everything, how his world was crumbling under his feet, and that made him feel damn good. This was not just revenge. It was justice. Jenny wrote to Stephen more and more often, sometimes even for no particular reason. They began to meet more often, and he noticed that his daughter became more outspoken. One day at dinner, she suddenly lowered her fork and said quietly, "Dad, Alex is cheating on his mom." Stephen froze. He was expecting something like this, but hearing it from Jenny was unexpected. He slowly put the glass down, remaining calm. "Are you sure?" His voice was even, but everything was boiling inside. "Yes, I saw messages on her phone, heard her cry at night when she thought I was sleeping. He lied to her, said that he was leaving on business, but I saw him dating some woman. Mom knows, but she doesn't do anything." Jenny fell silent, pursing her lips. Stephen frowned. "Why?" "Because she has nowhere to go," she said sadly. "Alex keeps her on a short leash. All the money is in his accounts. Her name is second everywhere. If she leaves, she simply will have nothing to live on." Stephen looked at his daughter, and at that moment he realized that his revenge was much deeper than he expected. Alex drove himself into a trap. He destroyed everything he had, and now Rachel finds herself in the same situation she once left Stephen in. "What are you going to do, Dad?" Jenny looked at him with hope. Stephen chuckled slowly. "Time to dot all the I's." Stephen knew Alex's end was near. Debts accumulated, banks refused loans, investors left. There is very little left, and Alex will lose everything: business, home, status. He will be broken and thrown out of the life that he so greedily built at the expense of other people's misfortune. But Stephen didn't think about it yet. Now he was concerned about something else: Jenny. He knew that when Alex fell and Rachel was at a dead end, his daughter could not be harmed. He was going to take her to him, give her the stability and care that she so lacked in her mother's house. Stephen began to put his house in order. He had not attached any importance to this for a long time, believing that he lived alone and did not need comfort. But now he saw everything differently. He bought new furniture for her room, updated the wallpaper, added details that he knew she liked. He ordered a comfortable reading chair, installed soft carpets, and hung new curtains. He wanted her to feel at home, a real home. Every time he made another change, a warmth spread in his chest. He didn't just create comfort, he prepared space for a new chapter in their lives. A little more, and Jenny will be where she really feels good, and Stephen will make sure she never feels abandoned again. Alex disappeared. When his business finally collapsed, when his debts drove him into a corner, he did the only thing he knew how to do. He ran away. He sold the house in order to somehow cover the loans, and then simply disappeared, leaving neither trace nor explanation. He abandoned everything, including Rachel and Jenny, who now found themselves on the street. For him, they were just a temporary phase that ended when the money was gone. He didn't fight, didn't try to fix the situation, he just disappeared, leaving ruins behind. Rachel tried to hold on, but without money and support, everything fell out of her hands. The bills became more and more, but the ability to pay them became less and less. Her pride prevented her from asking for help, but when it came to the point where she had to pack her things, she realized that she no longer had a choice. Alex always kept her on a short leash, controlled her finances, promised that everything would be fine, and she believed. Now she was left alone with her daughter, but without a future. And then Stephen appeared. He took Jenny in as planned. The house was already ready, and she felt comfortable there, as if she had always lived there. There was no fear or doubt in her eyes, only relief. She no longer wanted to live with her mother, who for years chose men over her. Now Jenny knew who was truly there when she needed it. But with Rachel, it was more complicated. She didn't ask for help. She was proudly silent, despite the despair in her eyes. And then Stephen himself suggested, "Until you get back on your feet, you can live with me." She looked at him in bewilderment. "For what? You hate me?" Stephen shook his head. "No, I stopped hating you a long time ago. But we have a daughter, and I won't let her worry about you. You will live here until you figure out your life." Rachel was silent. She was accustomed to contempt, to reproaches, to condemnation. She expected him to say something like, "It's your own fault," or "Now feel what it's like." But instead, he simply offered to help her. No ridicule, no gloating. She felt that he was not trying to humiliate her with this proposal. He was simply beyond that. "Okay," she finally said, lowering her eyes. But their life together did not mean forgiveness. Stephen had no intention of opening his heart to her again. He did it for Jenny, for her peace of mind, so that she does not see her mother broken and lost. Rachel got a room in his house, but there was a wall between them. He was not interested in her problems any more than necessary. He didn't ask how she was feeling. He didn't have long conversations and didn't pretend that everything was fine. She was a guest for him, temporary resident, and she understood this. Sometimes in the evenings she looked at him and saw a man whom she had once known, but whom she had already lost. Stephen has changed. He was no longer the one who blindly believed in love, who tried to hold on to it, who was ready to sacrifice himself for it. He grew up, he became stronger, and now he was the one in control. Several months have passed. Rachel was still living at Stephen's house, but her life was now starting to get better. She got a job not prestigious, not what she was used to, but honest and stable. Stephen helped her with her search using his connections, but did not interfere in her decisions. He just gave her a start, and then she had to cope on her own. Work changed her. For the first time in many years, she had to earn money herself, and it turned out to be not so easy. She could no longer spend money left and right, could not afford expensive restaurants and parties. But to her surprise, she did not feel unhappy. It was difficult, but to some extent, right. Stephen also helped her find an apartment. He knew that she wouldn't be able to live with him for long, not because he was kicking her out, but because they both needed to move on. He found her a small but cozy apartment in a good area where Jenny could visit her at any time. He himself helped with the move without further ado, just as a friend who supported her during this period. Over time, a strange balance was established between them. They weren't enemies, but they didn't become a couple again either. They were simply people who had once loved each other and were now learning to live side by side differently. They became closer, but not in the same way as before. There was no more passion, emotion, or pain. There was only quiet support. They communicated calmly, without reproaches or insults. Sometimes they drank coffee in the kitchen, discussing Jenny or things at work. Sometimes they could even joke with each other, but there was no flirting in this, only a slight nostalgia for what once was. Stephen didn't blame her anymore. He realized that revenge would not make him happy. He's already won. He kept his pride, got his life back, and most importantly, restored his relationship with his daughter. Rachel has changed too. She was no longer the woman who believed that a rich man was her ticket to the good life. Now she knows that money comes and goes, but the real value is the people who stick around no matter what. And while they didn't become a family again, they became what they should have been all along, two adults learning to respect each other. For my daughter's sake, for your own sake, for the life that went on. A year has passed. Life has finally returned to normal. Stephen sat on the veranda of his house, watching Jenny, who was sitting at her laptop, preparing for university. She matured, changed, but still remained the same smart and purposeful girl of whom he was always proud. And now he was next to her, supporting her in everything. He knew he had almost lost her once, but now they were closer than ever. They could talk about anything, about her plans, dreams, even about her experiences. He knew that this was the most valuable thing he had. Rachel also found her way. They no longer lived together, but maintained normal relations. She no longer depended on men, did not look for easy ways, but built her life herself. They met on holidays, communicated, but it was a different communication, without a past, without offense. Just two people who have a daughter together. Stephen also began to move on. He started dating women again, but without rush, without unnecessary expectations. He did not look for a replacement for the past, but simply lived. Sometimes there were short romances, sometimes something more serious, but so far nothing that could make him completely trust someone again, and that was okay. He no longer felt alone, he felt free. He no longer thought about revenge, about the past, about betrayal. All this is left behind. Now he had only the road forward, and he was ready for what the future would bring. He looked at Jenny and smiled. "How are your documents? Is everything ready?" he asked. "Almost." She raised her head and smiled back. "Thank you, Dad." Stephen nodded, feeling a warm wave inside. He did everything right, and now his life finally belonged only to him. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think, click to the next one.